Hello, this is Amin, and this is session 34 of ASP.NET Core tutorial. Thank you for watching Golden Courses tutorial series. In this session, we discuss about DisplayTextFor and DisplayForModel helpers, and also we continue our discussion about data annotation and data type and scaffold column. DisplayTextFor is somehow look like DisplayFor, and we can use DisplayTextFor instead of DisplayFor. And also we can display all the properties of a data model with DisplayForModel when we use a strongly typed view. Let's flip to Visual Studio and first work with these two HTML helpers. This is the project that we have developed until this session, and here is the view that we created in session 33. As I mentioned, I can replace DisplayFor with DisplayTextFor, and for proof this, I replace this DisplayFor, which is bound to amount, with DisplayTextFor. Let me use HTML class, and this time I use DisplayTextFor. And again, with Lambda Expression, I connect it to amount. And also one break line to go to the next line. Let me save it and run the project to see whether I have the value of amount with DisplayTextFor or not. As you can see, project is up and running, and I go to create a strongly typed view and submit the form. And as you can see, I have value of my amount here, and it is, as I mentioned, is same as DisplayFor. Also, I can use another HTML helper which display all the properties of a view model. Let me uncomment this line, and I comment all the lines which show all the properties of create cast view model. And this time I use another HTML helper which is DisplayForModel, and I don't need to use any Lambda expression, and automatically it's display all the properties of the view model. And let me save it and run the project again. And here I go to this action method and submit the form. And as you can see, I have all the value and label of all the properties. But here, as you can see, I have the ID of payment method. In this session, I want to have the method of the payment method instead of its number. And also I want to create another view model for these specific views. Let's back to Visual Studio and create another view model, which I call it cost register. Almost it has all the properties of create cost view model. And as the namespace of data annotation is not available in this class, I should add it with control period key, which is inside system component model data annotation. And also I don't need these lists anymore, and also this one, and also list of payment method. And also these properties no longer needed, and I remove it. And here I have just the properties that I want to display: amount, date, comment, category, and payment method. But here I change payment method from integer to a string because I want to display the name of method that I selected inside the registered form. For this purpose, I should first add one method to iPaymentMethod repository. I add getPaymentMethod by ID, and it's result is a string and its input parameter is an ID which is integer. And then I should go to a static payment method repository and implement the recently added method. With control period, I add the payment method that I want. And first, I want to catch the payment method which its ID is equal the ID that I passed to this one. I use this static list and I find for first or default, and I use Lambda expression, and I said if its ID is equal the ID that I passed to this one, and then I have the selected payment method in this variable, and then I return the method of this payment method, which is the value of payment method. For example, if the ID would be 2, I return a credit card or the rest. And then I go to cost controller. First, I create an instance of the recently created view model, which is cost register. And I call it cost register equal new. I fill the properties of cost registered instance of cost registered view model with the submitted data in created strongly typed view, and its amount would be equal model.amount, and its comment would be equal the model.comment. And also I have date, which would be model.date, and category would be equal model category. But here for payment method, it is a string. Payment method in model is integer, which is ID of the payment method, and I can get the method name with the method that I created inside the static payment method repository. That's why I use payment method repository, and I use get payment method by ID, which I created recently, and I use model.payment methods. Now I fill all the data that I want, and this time I pass cost register instead of the model that I passed in a previous session. But here I should change this model directive, and I should use cost register, which I created recently. And with these changes, I save the project and run the project to see the result. And again, I go to cost, create a strongly typed view. And here you can see I select, for example, credit card. In previous session, I received, for example, the ID of credit card, but with these changes, as long as I submit the form, you can see I have the method of payment method. And you imagine I don't want to have the payment method inside the data that I want to show. Imagine I don't want to reveal to the user which payment method was selected for that payment. That's why I can use a scaffold column. Let's back to Visual Studio. And inside the recently created view model in the cost register, I can hide the payment method with the scaffold column attribute, and as long as I use false, this property will not be appear in the form. Let's save it and run the project and see the result. And again, I go to cost strongly typed view, and as long as I submit the form, you can see I don't have the payment method anymore. But just bear in mind, this ability is just working when I use DisplayForModel, and if I use DisplayFor or DisplayTextFor, I can see the payment method again. I can prove it by commenting this line, and again I use DisplayNameFor and DisplayFor for presenting the data, and just I have the value of amount twice. That's why I comment one of them and save the project and run it. And again, I go to cast strongly typed view and I submitted the form. And you can see again, I have the payment method that I make its scaffold column to false. That's why this ability, I mean the scaffold column, is just working when I use DisplayForModel. And if I use DisplayFor or DisplayTextFor, I can see again the value of the payment method. And the next data annotation is data type. It is in some aspect look like the data format that we work in session 33. But in this session, I want to add some more property to cast registered to discuss about some type of data type. I add three more properties to cast registered data model, but as I want to unify the naming, I add a view model to end of this model to be use unified naming. But here, if I select yes, automatically in all the places that I use this view model, it's automatically changed to cast registered view model. And as you can see, the name of view model changed to cast registered view model. And also here inside the view, it is changed automatically. And even in the controller, it's changed to cast registered view model. This is the ability of Visual Studio IDE. And if I change a name of a view model, I have this option to change the class name in all the places that I use it. And here I set value to the three properties that I have added recently. The first one was website. And I use, for example, www.goldencourses.net. And the next one is email address. And I use info@goldencourses.net. And the next one is the current time that I use this view. And I call this view. And I have current time. And here I use date, time, and now. Let me save it, and inside the view, because I don't want to add all the properties one by one, I comment again this part and use DisplayForModel to catch all the data and to reveal all the properties of cast registered view model. And because of that, I uncomment DisplayForModel. And also I want to make the scaffold of payment method to true to be displayed, and I run the project. Again, I go to cast strongly, create a strongly typed view, and I submit the form. And here you can see I have website, email, and current time. But as you can see, the website is not a hyperlink, and also the email is not hyperlink. And also I want to see just the time that I call this view. For this purpose, I use data type for make them hyperlink, and I can use them as a website link and email link. Let's back to Visual Studio. And here for website, I use data type attribute. And again, I use data type.url. I can use data type URL for the link that I have in my view model. And also I have another data type for email address as well. But you can see as long as I type data type and add dot, I have several type of data type. Password, I have date, I have multi-line text, and several type of data type that I review some of them in this session, and you can review and use the rest in your project. And here I use email address. And for current time, I use another data type, which is time. And here for amount, I use currency data type. Let me save the changes and run the project. Now project is up and running, and I go to cast, create a strongly typed view, and I submit this form. And here you can see I have amount with the symbol of currency and also the format of currency. This symbol is related to the setting of my web server, and it is in US dollar, and I can change it, and I will discuss about it later. And here for the URL, I use relative URL because I missed HTTPS and HTTP in the first part of the URL. That's why it is relative URL. It means this URL is added to the current location of the application, and the current location of the server is the web server and also cost controller. That's why if I click on this link, I receive 404 because I don't have this path in my application. That's why I can solve this issue with adding HTTP or HTTPS before this URL to make it absolute routing. But for the email, as you can see, if I click on this one, I will have this email address as the recipient of my email in the email application that I have in my computer. And also I have current time with just short time format. I will solve this issue by adding HTTP or HTTPS before this URL, and also then I will talk about the globalization. If I want to change the format of the currency and the symbol of the currency, I should use system.globalization inside the startup configure class, and I should add this namespace to a startup class. And also I should create one variable with type of culture info, and with a string, I should mention the language and also the country that I want to follow. And also I can change the symbol of currency with this line with the variable that I created from culture info, and also number format and currency symbol. And then I set this variable to default thread current culture and default thread current UI culture. Let me flip to Visual Studio and implement the globalization inside my application. For this purpose, I should go to startup class, and inside configure method, first I create a variable with name of culture info, and I create an object of culture info. Culture info is inside globalization namespace, and I can add its namespace with control period. And by adding the namespace, I can create an object of this class. And I should enter language and country code inside the culture info. It has 4 namespace, and I use the first one, and I enter the culture with the language code and country code. And then I can add the currency symbol with this object with number format and currency symbol. And I call it with the symbol of currency that I want. For example, I add pound symbol, And then I can submit these changes to culture info that default thread current culture by equal it with the variable that I create. And also I submit these changes to default thread current UI culture by equal it with the variable that I create. And also I go to cost controller and make website URL absolute because it was relative, and I make it absolute by adding HTTPS in front of the URL. Let me save the changes and run the project once more. And again, I go to cost, create a strongly typed view, and by submitting the form, you can see I have pound symbol in front of my currency. And also you can see this URL is changed to absolute, and by clicking on this one, I will reroute to goldencourses.net website. And also you can see based on ISO 3166 the country code, and also based on ISO 639 language codes here. I will share this URL inside the description of this video and also in our website. These are the content that I want to present in this session. Thank you for being with us. Don't forget to follow us in our social media and subscribe our YouTube channel and like our videos. Once more, thank you for watching this tutorial.